just before starting, I just thought it's always nice to know who I'm talking to. If generally, if each one can just tell me quickly as to what is the business. I know all of you are startups, and so just so that I get a feel about who I'm talking to. Why don't you go first?
So I'm Vijay, and I'm coming from Chennai Robotics Club, and we are incubated at Flexter. It is robotic, the robotic offline robotic classes.
Okay. How about you?
We are of waste data, so we are converting waste plastics to fuel.
Okay.
I'm myself Swastik from Neo Motion. We are into design and manufacturing of products for physically challenged people. We have been in existence for the last 3 years, and we have completed a pilot sale and pilot production, and we are into our market entry stage. Our work primarily involves a lot of manufacturing, a lot of user interaction for design, after sales service support. That's the flavor of this stack.
Both product and service.
Both product and you can imagine it like a bike, like an automotive sector.
Oh, okay.
Very similar to that.
Okay. Why don't
Yeah, I'm Akshay, and this is my colleague Ashwin. So we are from Fabits Automation. We are into automation of composite part manufacturing. So we are into services right now, and so it's our own technology, and we'll be moving into products as well.
Okay, good.
Hello, myself Arivan. I am from Branish Technologies Private Limited. So we are into manufacturing and inspection services. So we are providing manufacturing inspection services. We are the first OEM in India manufacturing ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. So
Remotely operated vehicles.
yeah, underwater vehicles.
Underwater. Okay.
Yeah, we are also incubated from IIT Research Park. Right now we are in Pulidivakam. So
Okay.
Hi, so I'm Santosh, and these are my colleagues Vidyadhar and Nakul. So all of us are from Earthen Tunes, a company which is being pre-incubated in RTBI, and we are trying to make footwear for the rural community, mainly farmers.
Footwear.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi sir, I'm Ajay from a startup called Solinas Integrity. So we are developing inline inspection robots for inspection of underground pipelines. So we are incubated at IIT Madras incubation cell, and currently we are at market entry stage.
Okay.
Hello, sir. So I'm Shaktivel from Yali Mobility. So we are in the process of developing electric three-wheeler for locomotor disabled and elderly people to make their daily commute a lot more effortless and enjoyable. We are early stage of product development.
Hi, I'm Anuj from Digital Flora. We are involved in vertical farming in urban areas and services associated with others.
Vertical farming. Very interesting.
Hello sir, my name is Gaurav and I am from the E-Plane company, which we make hybrid unmanned aerial vehicle as of now, and we are in product development phase right now. So yeah.
Yeah, I am Ravi from Vrata Rural Ventures. We are working to solve some of the real life problems of farmers. The current focus that we are working on is to detect onset of infestation in crops.
Hi, I'm Manan. I'm from Thivanam Additives. We are actually a nutraceutical company, and we are at market entry stage currently.
I am Dr. Sashi. I work as a principal scientist in IITM Bioincubator. So we take care of all the startup company in bioscience area.
Okay.
Hi, this is Anish. My startup would be Star Bounty. It's a virtual audition platform for media talents. And we are also peer-to-peer content distribution channel platform we have. And we are an incubator of Trextep. Yeah. Thanks.
So could we have a mix of, product and service providers here? So, today's session is primarily on contracts, understanding contracts. So, I'm sure some of you will agree with me that there is this myth about contracts. Some people think it's this voluminous piece of document on a stamp paper, which is boring to read and sometimes difficult to understand. So there are some businessmen who think that it is a necessary evil, so let's just do it. So I'm trying to dispel that myth today. That is going to be my attempt. I'm trying to tell you a few things about contracting which will show you how it is a simple thing and not as complex as people have made it look. So what is contract? If it is not a complex document, what is it? How is it useful for a business? What are the advantages that one gets when you enter into a contract? And obviously, because I'm a lawyer, what are the law related to contracts that you need to be mindful of when you do a contract? Now, these are the few things that I'll be addressing on. So just to start with, I think we should have a very interactive session. That way, I think, otherwise I'll keep talking and I'll just, I won't even know whether, I'm making progress in terms of what I'm trying to do. So start with, let me ask you, any of you here, have you entered into a contract? What was your experience? What is the kind of contract?
So actually we had made service contracts with so many people, like logistics, transportation, manufacturing, and then some related system services. So these contracts we have.
So you use some outside help for the contracts, or how did you do it?
Actually, we will made a contract between vendor or service provider, whomever providing services, like it is necessary for the company, or else it will be necessary in daily basis, like transportation, like for manufacturing and services, like so many things are there. So like
Okay. Anybody else who has an experience of
anything which is reducing our burden, and then we will get it easily through a mutual understanding basis. That's kind of contract.
Anybody else who can give me examples of the contracts that they have? So you outsource your manufacturing, is it?
So, like we define kind of the stages. Okay, we'll give him the drawing. They will see the drawing. They will sign off so that they have understood all the drawings of it. When will they give the sample, and how many samples will they give? How will we inspect? And so it will maybe go around 20-30 steps. And who will transport? Where will the inspection happen? So when we go through all of it, one experience that we get, there are a lot of things which they are not comfortable with. We get to know of it upfront. Fine, we know that they will not be taking care of this. This is what we have to take care of. So it kinds of clears out the responsibilities, and that's something which we have learned.
So you first sit and discuss with them, and then you sign on whatever is the agreed.
Yeah. So we list down things, we give it off to them, and we agree, and then we sign off that.
So good. So what if I tell you that each one of us in this room, almost on a daily basis, we enter into contracts? See, we go to a movie theater, we buy a ticket, watch a movie. That's a contract. The theater is promising us that they will show the movie that they promised to show. We are promising to the theater that we will finish the movie and we'll walk out, we'll not stay the night there. When we go to a shop and we buy a product, it could be anything, a household good, it could be a TV, it could be a washing machine, whatever. We pay the money, we get the product. We also get a warranty. We enter into a contract at that stage. I'm sure all of us here have an insurance policy. That's a contract. We have signed in the insurance policy. It's a different matter that most of us don't read the terms. We go online and we do online transactions. I think that's something we do on a daily basis. That is a contract. So when we talk about contract, it's not necessarily these voluminous, pages of documents. It's something which is very integral part of our life, if you come to think of it. So what is the common? I gave you 4 examples of a movie of a shop or an insurance. So what is the common thing in all this? Anybody want to take a guess? What is the common thing about the 4 things are all different. But what is the common element there? Mutual understanding, yes.
Accepting only we can enter to.
That's a good one, yes. Good. So basically, there is a fundamental thing in a contract is a promise. When I go to a movie theater and I know that I want to watch this movie, the theater is promising me that I will get to watch that movie and not some other movie. The theater is promising me that it will not, instead of a movie, it will not show me a magic show or a play. I am promising the theater that, look, I will walk out the moment movie is over. So that is how it works. So the promise, if I take an insurance policy, there is a promise made that I will pay the premium time, whenever it is due. Please. The insurance company gives a promise that it will, keep me secured from whatever it is, whether it is an accident or whatever. Similarly, when I go to a shop and buy a product, there is a promise that if there is a defect, I could go the next day and I could change it if there is a defect. So promise is a very crucial part of any contract. And human nature, generally we would like to keep a promise. That's very fundamental. But the question is a promise a contract? We know that promise is an integral part of a contract, but if I make a promise, is it a contract? Just to give you an example of the movie, I'll go back to the same example. If I go to the movie theater and I inquire with them, okay, what is the movie which is going on? And I make a promise that, okay, I'll come back and buy the ticket later in the day. And is that a contract? It's not. Similarly, in a shop, I go, I do the window shopping, I pull the salesman, I ask all kind of questions for half an hour. I tell him, okay, I'm coming back tomorrow, please keep the thing. And I go to another shop and I get a better discount or buy it there. So although I made a promise, it is not converted into a contract. So what is that important element which makes a contract? No, you don't need a document. When I go to a movie theater, there is no document signed. There is a contract made, but no document is signed. It is movie making is movie watching is a contract which you don't even have to say that I agree. You have to just buy the ticket. It's all understood. So document comes later. But fundamentally, I think our friend here was mentioning there is two things in a contract which is very, very fundamental, without which there cannot be a contract. One is an offer and the other is its unconditional acceptance. So I'll go back to the same example. So the movie theater is making an offer that you can come and pay and watch the movie. Of course, nobody is saying that in so many words. But in any contract, there are two parties normally, there could be more. There is always something offered and that thing being accepted absolutely. Now, absolute acceptance is very fundamental. It can happen that in a situation, the person who is making the offer normally, suppose I have 100 bags of, let's say, some agricultural product, I want to sell it to you. I can make you an offer and say that, look, I have these 100 bags, I can sell it to you at, say, 1,000 rupees. I can deliver it in a week's time. That's the offer that I make. If you say, okay, everything is agreed, I agree on the quantity, the price and the date, then there is a absolute acceptance from you. We enter into a contract. But instead of that, if you say, okay, I'm okay with the quantity, I'm okay with the date, but I'm not comfortable with the price. Instead of 1,000, why don't you give it to me at 900? So there is a partial acceptance, but there is no contract. I can't later go and say, no, listen, he should at least take a part of it at a particular price. So what you're doing is you're giving me a counter offer. And so then what happens? The acceptance will have to be from my side then. So I would be the party who would have made the offer and I would also be accepting because there is a counter offer. So an offer and acceptance becomes very, very, very crucial because it's very, yeah, so we are on offer and acceptance. So acceptance has to be absolutely unconditional. So there are situations where, instead of making an offer, there are, for example, people float tenders. It's an invitation to make an offer. So I'm giving you an invitation that why don't you people come and offer, what is your price? So offer and acceptance can be in various forms. So these are the two crucial elements of offer and acceptance. Now, what happens when two people come together, make an offer and it is accepted? What happens then? What is happening there? It's very basic. No. No, forget it. If suppose it's not business, I'm asking you, will you come and play football with me at 5 p.m.? You're saying yes. We are agreeing on something, right? So it's something which people are agreeing. So it's an agreement. So when I say contract, it is an agreement. So when we talk about contract, we always say it is a contractual relationship. So, the word relationship is normally used otherwise, when it's a friend is, if it's a relative or something, but in legal term, we use it very carefully. It's deliberately used as a contractual relationship because it could be a situation where there are completely, strangers, two strangers who don't know anything about it, but for business purposes, they come together and agree on something. And what they agree on is the contract. Now, two crucial elements in any contract, which all of you will have to keep in mind when you're doing any contract, is the rights and obligations. So, what is it that I get and what is it that I need to do? So, these are two fundamental things which any contract has to have, and before you sign or agree on a contract, you need to be clear on these two aspects. What is it that I am getting out of it? Now, I was talking to you about agreement and contract. So, all contracts are agreements, but all agreements are not contracts. That sounds a little tricky, right? So, let me again give you an example. So, let us assume there is a gentleman called A and there is a gentleman called B. A has a warehouse which is empty, he wants to let it out for 6 months. He is approached by B. He says, I want to use your warehouse for 6 months, I'll pay you 50,000 rupees in advance for the use of it. And they strike a deal, there is an agreement. So is that a contract or not? It is a contract, right? Now the same situation, let's assume that we know something more than what is happening between A and B. So A says that, look, I want to give this warehouse of mine to you on lease. He knows that what B is going to do is to store illegal firearms in the warehouse or illegal drugs in the warehouse. They agree on it. Same terms, 50,000, you can store it for 6 months. That is an agreement, but that is not a contract. The reason being that you cannot enforce that agreement. You can't. So let's assume in this example which I gave you, let's assume A receives the 50,000 rupees and tells B, no, I won't give you the place to store your things, your firearms. So B can't go to a court and say that, look, he has taken the money from me, he is cheating me, because the whole purpose of the contract was an illegal objective. So if the objective of the contract is illegal, of the agreement is illegal, then it is not enforceable by law. So it has to be an agreement to convert into a contract should be something which is enforceable by law. So when I say enforceable by law, one of the examples is what I told you just now, that having a purpose which is illegal. There could be other examples. For example, if somebody says, I will bring this person to life who's dead, and give me 5 lakh rupees. That's an impossible thing to do. That's again, it's an agreement maybe between the parties, even if you write it on a stamp paper and all that, but it doesn't become a contract. Because if you take it to a court of law and say that, look, he agreed to bring this person to life, I mean, it's impractical, right? So there are a few other things which makes an agreement a contract. When I say enforceable by law, it has to become a contract. So one of the few things is, of course, there has to be two parties to it. Somebody had told that there has to be two parties to a contract. I can't have a contract that I will sell whatever I have to myself. It's a very fundamental thing. There has to be two different parties. The second thing is what we say a free consent between the parties. So there should not be, the contract should not be because of some fear or threat by the other party. And it could be a case of a fear, threat, or it could be an undue influence where you have over some kind of a influential power over the other party. You get them to sign. Then again, it is not a free consent. So free consent is something. Then the competency of the parties, as we say, you can't have a contract with a person who is a minor. So that's something you need to be careful about. If on the other side you have a person who is below the age of 18, you better make sure that it is a guardian who is representing the minor. Similarly, competency would also cover somebody who is not mentally of a sound mind. So if there is a contract which even if I sign it without knowing that the counterparty is not a mentally sound person, I will not be able to enforce that contract. Then of course it should not be a vague contract. When I say vague contract, if I just come and say, look, I have 10 houses, I will sell you one house at some price. That's vague as it can get. Which house nobody is identifying, what money nobody is identifying. So you can't have vague terms. So these are essentially the things, 4 or 5 crucial things which will make an agreement a contract, because you can then, based on that agreement, go to a court of law and it becomes enforceable by law. Now, as far as India is concerned, the law of contract is governed by the Indian Contract Act. Now, the Indian Contract Act is approximately 150 years old. It was introduced in 1872, but it is one of the finest drafted laws in India, you will find, because even after 150 years, you can apply it to today's situation of a software contract or whatever you talk about. Because what that act does is it says what to do, what not to do in particular situations. So it doesn't address specific contracts, it addresses situations. And ultimately most contracts will have similar situations. So we also have something, so basically all contracts are governed by Indian Contract Act. There are 2 other enactments which kind of are useful to know. If you are dealing with land, immovable property, it's a Transfer of Property Act, which again is a grand old, it's an 1882 legislation. So that applies to contracts relating to land and other things. And there is a Sale of Goods Act, which normally one would use when you're dealing with products, sale of products and stuff like that. That's a more recent, that's 1933, by the way. So somebody was talking here about, I think I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, somebody was saying that there should be a document. Should a contract always be in writing? Anybody who wants to give it a shot?
I agree in terms for the software update. It's not in writing, I don't sign it. I just accept it on my phone. I just
So okay, let me rephrase my question. Should you always have something, either when I say writing, I'm not saying handwritten. Should there be a document for a contract? No, the law says you can have a contract which is oral, which is verbal. There are some kind of contracts which the law requires you to have it in writing. When I say writing, it is a document form. It is a contract relating to sale of land, lease of land. Wherever immovable property is involved, it is a must that you should not only write it, but also take it and register it. But any other contract can be a verbal contract. Now, But why is it that people have written contract or in a document form? Why is it that they do it? I'll again, try to explain this by, giving an example. Let's say the same A and B who we were speaking about. So let's say they enter into a contract where A says that I will manufacture, or let's say they have been having business for last 10 years. And periodically they have, every month or every 2 months they have this verbal understanding that, look, I will sell you 100 kilos of this thing. You pay me 10% advance, the remaining after delivery. This is a simple contract between them. Verbally they agree, they pick up the phone, speak, and then it's been going on smoothly, no problem at all. Suddenly, when it comes to the most recent transaction, A tells B on the phone that, look, the input cost has gone up. I can't really manage with the 10% advance that you're giving me. I would need something more. I would expect a 50% advance. B says on the phone, yes, okay, fine, I'll pay you. So B says, okay, I'll pay you after a week. After a week, he gives only 10%. And A says, no, you are wrong. You promised to pay me 50. B says, no, I promised only 10. He's lying. He's lying. But if both of them were to go to a neutral person, let's say they don't go to a court, they go to a neutral person. How is it, or let's say they come to you, how are you going to decide, because you don't know the background knowledge, I've told you that. How are you going to decide who is correct and who is wrong? Here is a case where for last 10 years you've been accepting 10%. Why would I not believe B? No, that's the problem in having a verbal contract. It's all fine so long as things don't go wrong. For 10 years there was no problem. The problem arose in the last month when this whole thing happened. That is why it is always better to have a written contract, because what it does is it very clearly sets out the rules of the game. As I said, rights and obligations are set out very clearly. This is what I will do. This is when I will do. I will do this only if you do this. So all these things can be set out in writing and can be signed off by the party. So in the same example, if there was a written paper of where both of them had signed, things become very simple. Whatever you did over the last 10 years don't matter. You have signed something now. Therefore, we will go by the 50% advance. So that's the advantage of having a written contract. Now, when I say written contract, the question is, should it always be a long winding, lengthy piece of paper which runs to 10-15 pages on a stamp paper and all that? The answer is no. You can have a contract by email. You can send an email saying that I want to sell this product. These are the terms. Please confirm acceptance. If a reply email comes, yes, accepted, that is a contract. So, doing a contract, yes.
First example is get some food here. And the first example you gave is that they have been doing this. They've been doing business for 10 years, and suddenly the advance changes from 10% to 50%. If the guy asking A asks for 50% and B orally accepted, and let's say A, after putting the phone down, sends a very nice email, thank you very much for confirming that going forward you will give us a very polite one. Is that contractually enforceable if B does not respond to it?
That's a very good question, very good point. So we have to go back to the acceptance which I was talking about. So offer and acceptance, I said unconditional acceptance. So would silence amount to acceptance? So the answer is yes. There could be some situation where, because it could differ from case to case. It could be a case where the person could come and say that, look, I never got this email. then you're getting into the, I'm typically talking like a lawyer in a real situation. Then you are getting into A will have the problem of proving that the email was actually delivered to him. But silence can be treated as acceptance. So there can be acceptance by conduct also.
So I actually raised this very intentionally, that very often you guys will find it difficult to get acceptance of certain things with either your customer, particularly if they are a very bureaucratic government kind of a setup. So this, what he just now mentioned, is also relevant to minutes of meeting. Have any of you ever tried getting a government guy to sign on minutes of meeting?
Most
I'll
impossible.
give you a Bharat Ratna the day you achieve it. So the best way of doing that is to not call it minutes of meeting, to send out a very nice polite thing where half the letter or half the email would be, thank you for the kind courtesy extended, it was blah, 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 blah. And then the 5 main points which you discussed. The best part is that guy also will not say no. So because of that, it kind of becomes at least some ground to stand on. Very difficult to fight them. But at least 6 months later you have a problem. You can produce that. Some leg to stand on. Would that, what I'm saying, would that be acceptable?
Absolutely. Yes. Please, ask the mic.
So is actually, if we are communicating things on through email, if they are accepting, it means it is legally enforceable or not?
Yes, it is. So, the Information Technology Act, which as of now it is a good 15, 20-year-old legislation, recognizes email communication, and you can take a printout of the email and produce it in court and it is accepted. And the fact that there could be a contract between two commercial people just based on exchange of email is something which the Supreme Court has confirmed. Although there is no law, because as I said, you're talking about a enactment which is 150-year-old. Obviously, nobody knew about emails and all that. So the Supreme Court has confirmed that you can do it by email. Can be any communication. So you're right. It need not be email. It could be any form of communication. So long as So communication again, it's a different facet of whole contracting. Whether the communication has reached the person or not. So we've when we do some cases, we have come across situations where people have placed an order over telephone. So the question is whether the offer was made from the place where the telephone call was made, or so Chennai and Nagpur, person making the offer is in Chennai, the person accepting is in Nagpur. Where was the offer received? Where was the contract made? Now we have these interesting situations. So communication becomes very important. So when you say you can probably say I've used WhatsApp, and if you have a reply, that's good enough.
Another question is, if for an example, if they wrongly put yes, I approved, in some situation there will be, if you are switching over emails means, right now we are having automatic options are there. If some email is coming to our side means, there will be messages in that bottom like yes, approved or something. Sir, I wrongly done this thing. I just didn't read your email properly, but I wrongly done this thing, like that. Question will arise. I had a bad impression like that. That's why if it is on that basis means, what will be the...
So you're saying without having an intention to accept, accidentally something goes out.
Yes.
You will be in trouble. It's up to you to ensure that there is no such thing, and if there is something which has happened, you immediately recall it and say that it was sent by accident. So silence, like we were discussing, it can sometimes, like in the example of A and B, after the phone call or discussion, if A sends an email that look, this is what we discussed, and B keeps quiet, it can be accepted. So we call it acceptance sub silentio. So you can remain silent, but it will be deemed to have been accepted. Yes, please.
Is there any time frame for that silence? Beyond this point, it becomes that the silence is no longer silence.
There's no such thing. Each situation will differ. So no law says that if it is 10 days, it is nothing like that. It could be.
Actually, we faced the situation. We had an agreement with our supplier. They said we can pay 10% in advance, and it was written document. And after that, they made us saying that okay, we need to increase it to 20%. So after seeing that mail, I called him saying that okay, no, it's not possible to do it. And I didn't reply to the mail particularly. I said okay, it's not possible. Ready for it. Even though I can accept it through a personal letter, I have called them and informed saying that okay, it's not accepted. So after 4 months, they said no, we agreed on 20%. So now they are trying to enforce it. So I'll be like a victim for that.
No. So in the situation that you are saying is slightly different, because what you are saying is you already have a contract. You already have a contract. Both of you have signed saying that it is going to be 10%. After 3 months, he says, or whatever, he says, no, it has to be 20%. So your silence there will not make a difference, because it is already a contract. If you want to change a contract, you again need both parties to agree. So in that case, the silence will not really matter. So silence, in some situations will not really make a difference, but most situations, if you keep silent, it will be deemed to be a consent.
And sometimes when we're doing projects or something like that, when we say okay, we agreed on something, and let's say we're trying to get into a contract, and what they think is okay, we have to have a contract. Is it trustable like that? If we say we have a contract, they'll think again, okay, they're not even trusting us. They are trying to put up a contract for everything like that.
You see, it's a good thing that you're bringing up this, because what I have seen is, as one situation is like this where people are very reluctant to sign a contract. There are other set of people who will say that I will not move ahead without a contract. Now, in your situation where the other party is saying that, look, let's not, I'm worried about a contract. That's where, you need to simplify it. You need to have, the contract need not be a bulky, that's the whole problem. People think, oh, contract is something which is, let's not touch that. So make it simple. Cover the whole thing in one, one page. You can do that, You call it by what name? Ultimately, it is, a rose is a rose. That's what they say, right? So it's a contract. Ultimately, whether you call it an MOU, an agreement, or whatever, or you don't even call it a name. Yes.
So actually, in real life, most of the contracts has very complex legal terms and many diplomatic sentences. Like some contract is like simply written in some number, and later it will be said that it can be varied as per the requirement or something XYZ. It can be varied. It's that point will no longer suffice. Like that point will no longer be acceptable. So like most of the contracts are like that. So like how to deal with those things, like because we don't understand particularly legal.
So I'll tell you how to deal with that situation. Now you should ask the question, why is that document first of all finding a place there? It's like to give an example.
No, supposingly I'm subscribing to Amazon Prime, and it has a big legal document saying that $9.99 per year. But it also says that the price may vary after 1 year. They are not saying by 10%, 20%, and I will be charged supposedly 2,000 rupees.
So these online contracts where you have no other choice but to accept. Those are called clip wrap contracts where you have no choice. Now we've had situations where where one party is saying that you take it or leave it. It's a standard form. So in that situation, courts have taken a view that if the other party did not have a bargaining power, they say. As recently as April, the Supreme Court has decided in a case involving a builder and a purchaser of a house, and this person was not an illiterate or anything. He was a knowledgeable person. He was They said that no, we will not accept this as a contract because it is completely one-sided. So it's some kind of a landmark judgment, because normally the view the court would take is, look, you both have sat and discussed and signed the contract. We will not change it. It was up to you to do it at that point of time. So it is always possible for you to show, but I really don't have an answer. If you don't want Amazon Prime, don't take it. That's all. I mean, you don't have a choice there.
No, you also have a choice of not renewing it.
Correct. So
No, it is just an example. Like
the bigger question here is, how many of you have voted for government tenders? That's all, only one person, no experience here. These days, government tendering is all electronic. Gone are the days when you submitted copies and you had an option to change some terms and conditions, which now you accept it or you are not allowed. Unless you press that accept button, it won't allow you to fill in the other.
no, it's not now. Even earlier, that's how it has been.
Yeah, but earlier at least when you gave it in writing, you had an option to write certain things. Whether they considered it or not, that was a different thing. Now when you file it electronically, you do not have any options. So nobody is compelling you to go and bid for that tender.
no,
You want to bid for that tender, you accept all the terms and conditions. And some of them are ridiculous. They say they have the right to defer the execution of the order if placed on you. But the time frame they will give you is, let's say, 30 days. So they can defer it by 30 days, and for 30 days, defer it by 90 days. And for 90 days, you sit twiddling your thumbs, wondering when they will give that order. But the day they give that order, you have to execute within 30 days. Now, let's say you were deploying very capital-intensive equipment to honor that contract. Are you going to keep it idle for 90 days?
So the choice is with you.
That business, you accept it. The question here is, you do it knowingly or unknowingly? I think that this session will explain to you.
Exactly. So that's the whole thing. You know what you are getting into. There's no point saying I got into very reluctantly. There's no place for reluctance there. You did it or you did not do it. So if you don't like it, just move away. Just to, you were talking about public sector. I was looking at a contract, a 15-year-old contract involving the port. So pre-bid questionnaires are circulated to people. There's a pre-bid meeting. The bidders go there and say that because they've given the model contract upfront. So they say this clause is, not all right, or you need to do this. No discussion on the clauses in the contract. Even in a pre-bid meeting, today you don't have an option, but you have to click. But even those days when it was not done online, you used to have a pre-bid meeting, which was just a formality. Okay, we have had a pre-bid meeting, but no, non-negotiable. So I think before we started these questions, I think I was on the emails. You can have a contract by email, but what you need to be very clear about is, let's assume you discuss with your counterparty and you send an email saying that this is as we discussed, and you keep that email. After 2 weeks, he comes and says, okay, you send that email, it's all right. Now, this is the contract, it contains the same things that you put in the email. You please sign it. You have some kind of trust in him and you sign it without reading. If that subsequent document has anything which is different from the email, the subsequent document is what will govern. So you need to be very careful. You may think that, okay, an email has done the job, I've said whatever I have to, but if there is a change and if you go and sign it, whatever is the last document is what will be binding on you. That is something which you need to be conscious about when you're sending an email, but you also follow up with a.
So even the signing of the contracts, this we are using e-signature, which provides to all the lenders. So that's valid to avoid this
understand that conflict. Right?
Yes. Yes. So we'll move into what are the advantages of having a written contract, which I think I've already said what is the advantage. But what I would want to say is, typically the mistakes which people make when they sign a contract. Now, I've in my interaction with various clients and other people, I've seen businessmen, three kind of people when it comes to contract. The first who say no contract, I'll do my business on trust. Second is somebody who says whatever you say is fine, dotted lines I'll sign. The third is somebody who's more sophisticated, who thinks, okay, I need to have a contract, let me employ a lawyer or a chartered accountant who is probably aware of these things. And they get a contract. And then they sign a contract like the one you said, where there are clauses which contradict each other. There are things, I have read a lease deed, a lease contract which says parties will keep confidentiality. I don't know why. That is what happens when you give. It's like, me going to I have no idea about softwares, but I'm a lawyer, I have my cases and all that. I want a case management software which is very specific to my needs. I go to a software guy and says, give me a case management. I don't give him any other input. It's like that. You go to a lawyer and say, give me a lease deed. I mean, the lawyer will think of all possible situations and put it there. Unless you tell him that, look, it is for 3 years and I've agreed on this thing. So that is where the contract goes wrong. So if you're going to sign a document which has got unwanted things, you're better off not having one. So that is a mistake that people make. The other mistake is signing on dotted line. That's again a very dangerous thing, because as I said again, a contract, having a contract or not having a contract is all right so long as things are all fine. It becomes relevant only when things go wrong. And when things go wrong, you are better off not having a bad written contract. Because you can always say, okay, it was verbally agreed. But if you have a bad written contract, you are stuck with that. So that's the mistake which people make. And how is it that one can avoid these mistakes? So basically, you need to, like I said, if it's a person who doesn't really believe in having a long winding contract, you can probably exchange emails. Well, you don't even have to involve an external person, a lawyer or anybody. But if it comes to that, then most importantly, before you involve the lawyer, the two parties need to sit and discuss, okay, this is how it is going to be. Just to give you, an example, suppose you have to manufacture something for which a particular raw material is required. Let's say he has to supply that raw material to you. Now you are manufacturing that product because you have got an order from him and he has said you have to supply to me in 6 months' time. You want the raw material to be given to you in next 1 week so that you can start your manufacturing. You go and tell the lawyer, I need a supply contract. So the lawyer, you have not told the lawyer that you are manufacturing this because you have a deadline with him. All that the lawyer knows is this dealing. So the contract will only say, you have to supply me this raw material. Sometimes it may not even say by which date. It may not even say that if you don't supply to me by that date, I don't need it because I have this contract and all that. So that is why two parties will have to sit together before involving a lawyer or a third party and understand, okay, what is it that we are going to do? Why is it that he has to supply the raw material to you? Because you have a deadline with him. So if he has agreed to that, then he is conscious of that. Then you put all that in the contract. Then what happens is, if he doesn't supply, then your recourse under law is far more effective against him than having a contract which says, okay, I will supply, without even giving any other particulars. So if it comes to having a formal document, as you would call in a stamp paper, please spend some time. Understand what, all that you have to see is this is what I'm getting into, what can go wrong, and if something goes wrong, how am I protected? And these are the fundamental things that one needs to look at in any contract. And once you know this and you explain this to whoever that external person is, putting together a contract is not. And you can very well tell the lawyer that, look, I don't need a 20-page contract. I need a 3-page contract. So it avoids all those situations of having, you blame it on cut and paste, invariably that's what people do, and then some unnecessary clauses come in.
I have recent experience that I was simply going for a non-disclosure agreement. I was giving my product for testing. So I just asked my CA to give me the agreement. So that agreement was so complex that I could hardly understand it, like even not 10% of that agreement. So why can't we put it like in simple words what we want and just send it off? That is what my
to answer your question, I think you need to blame the Britishers for that. No, because the story goes like this, that in the UK, in those days, when in the 18th century, lawyers used to speak in Latin because the common man would never understand. They took pride in that, and that's a fashion which they brought to India. And since even now we use Latin terms in courts, but we use terms which nobody understands. Sometimes even judges don't understand. What were you doing when you did this contract? So yeah, you're right. And if somebody has given you a complicated non-disclosure agreement, I'm surprised, because a non-disclosure agreement, according to me, shouldn't be more than 1.5 pages. Because what is the whole purpose of that? You are exposing something which is privy to you alone. You don't want that person to misuse it. And you need to agree that if you misuse it by any chance, I'm not saying you will, but if in case something happens, I need to be compensated to this extent. This is all that it needs to say. So, like I said, if somebody says, no, I'll give you a 20-page one, you say, no, I don't need it. I need something, I only need this, and for this, what is the protection that I'll get?
Just adding to his point, let's say we are dealing with rural people who for them education itself is a big step. Getting them into this legal terminology without breaking the trust and having an understanding. Do you have any suggestions, or have you come across?
So you see, one way of addressing this, it's a good question again. You see, because if you take a very formal document and all that, it's going to be tricky. Best thing is to have a simple document in the local language. Don't do it in English. So do it in the local language. Have some witness who's there of the locality present there, who sign it. It could be in a simple one-page, without any of the typical jargons which we lawyers use. Without any of that, I'm doing this, and so keep it as simple as. And if a third party looks at it, it should be believable that okay, this is what has been said there. But again, you need to sit with the farmer and explain to them that look, this is what is going to be the agreement between us. Unless that agreement is there, that is where these dotted line contracts become very, you sign on dotted lines. The agreement is somebody else. It's one person's thinking which both of them have signed. That is dangerous.
So what exactly do you mean by dotted line?
No, you sign on the dotted line. Both of us want to do some contract. I say, look, this is the one. You just sign it. That invariably happens because there is a reluctance, to understand. Like it can be boring, to read a document which has some 115 notwithstandings and whereases and all that stuff. I agree with you, but then it's a necessary evil. You can't do away with it. Therefore, you need to spend some time. You need to simplify things, and it is slowly changing even in India. In fact, there is a movement started of simplifying the language which are used in documents. So we try to do, in our firm, we try to do that. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the client says, no, I need a 30-page document. I don't want a simple document. So then you go with and give it to the person. He's very happy. But I think that needs to change, because ultimately, what is a contract? It is two normal people agreeing on something. Why complicate it?
Adding to that,
we are making contract between two parties, it will be documented in like legal pages, or it will be email understanding is better for them.
See, I won't say this is better than that. So long as it's clear to both parties that this is how it will work. Whether it is email, whether it is a formal document, it doesn't really matter.
The question, like when we are simple people, researcher and all, we have little bit knowledge of this. But when we talk to a bigger company, suppose very big company like 1,000 crore company, they come with a battery of lawyers, and when they come for talking, they are all sitting there, so how we should negotiate with them? Because if we give them some standard form also, they say no, our lawyer will see that and then we will come back. And then lawyer, the research, the person who is technical person, they don't talk. The lawyer start talking, So in that situation, what we should take? How we should
see, it can be an overwhelming situation. It can.
So can I respond to this, please? Actually, this is what all the companies I mentor, this is what I suggest. The less you involve lawyers, and he will agree with me on that, in spite of being a lawyer, the better off you are. So, but they are necessary. So, the best way of handling that is, you must be clear in your mind as to what is it that you want out of this agreement or contract. So, I have this very simple theory that it has to be done in what are my obligations, what are the things I will do, and what are the things the other party will do. And each one put it down, like say what I will do, what if you have already negotiated, nothing like it, but if there are still some loose ends to be negotiated, put it in 3 buckets. What is non-negotiable? That means if they don't agree to this, you are walking out. What is nice to have, which means that if they agree, good. If they don't agree, I'm fine. And what is it that you are willing to negotiate? Likewise, on the other side, same 3 buckets. If he insists on something, but for that you need clarity of business. You need clarity in your mind. So once you have done this and you have negotiated, you hand it over to them, they will draft a very simple contract very easily. Because they are very clear that this is what you want and everything has been discussed. They may still guide you on some issues given their experience that you have not considered this or you have not considered that. But that apart, from a business perspective, you would have covered most of it. So this is one aspect. The second aspect is that when you negotiate for the first time, there are things which you will not know. There are things which even your lawyer may not know. So I'll give you one specific example. And again, this is dated. I could be wrong. But let's say you did a contract in the Middle East for a sales contract. Let's say 10 years back. You might say that this contract is valid for 3 years. You may or may not have used the word exclusive in that. It does not matter. In Dubai, a contract signed is an exclusive contract for life. Because you cannot change the party till that guy gives a release. Okay, so this, if your lawyer has Middle East experience, he'll be able to guide you. So what does a good lawyer do? He will refer this to some counterparty of his, but that raises costs. Very often a startup cannot afford that. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg story. So you want good advice, it is expensive because you will have to do that. Or you go to a person who has that background, who has that experience, at least who knows how to ask the right questions, who may or may not be current. Like I am not current, but I know that 10 years back this law was there in the Middle East. So this is one thing I know, And I use this example all over the place. Like this, there are a million things I don't know. So it's important that you have clarity on the business and go to a lawyer who will be able to figure this out for you, to guide you on things which are not covered in this. Is there anything I would...
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're spot on that. Just, one mistake which I've seen, you're talking about negotiation. One mistake which I've seen parties do when they go for negotiation is they are not prepared to walk out of that room without the contract. You should have that mindset that, look, this may not work. Like we were saying, that there could be non-negotiable terms for you. If they are not agreeing, just walk out. It need not happen. But invariably what happens, people think it's like going, I need to sign. They give in. It should all, that's why we say contractual relationship. It should almost be like Jadagam Bhakram. I'm going to get married, whether the horoscope is matching or not. Your negotiation is like that. If you are not agreeing with me on one of my crucial points, and if I'm able to justify my point, then I don't think it's working. So that mindset should be there. Although I'm going in to negotiate and try to work it out, there is a good possibility it will not work, and this is the breaking point, I will walk out. Most of the parties are not willing to do that. That is where I think they end up unwillingly signing something and then later regretting.
Because why I am asking this question, because I work for IIT with signing contracts for our MOU and all. So we have standard forms. So we fill the form and then we give to big companies.
They will
what
say no.
Companies they do, they say that no, we will not accept this. Our lawyer will make and then use it. So that becomes very, and their languages are very complicated and very complicated, documents. So in that situation, how we should also say that no, whatever we have, you have to agree.
No, so negotiation is a different kind of a skill. So like I said, you need to justify, you need to convince them on why you want that and why it is non-negotiable. And you should be prepared to walk out saying that, okay, they are not agreeing at some point. And if it requires, you need to involve an external lawyer. So, there are, for example, the firm which I am part of, we have a exclusive startup practice. Of course, it is based out of Bangalore. But, we do exclusively, there are people working with startups, and therefore the fee is also that much not higher on the higher side. So there are not only this firm, there are other firms also who do that. So there could be a situation where you are trusted with a document where it's too complex. You may have to need external help, but then the ultimate decision should be yours. That okay, this is the point. If they are not agreeing on this, I don't want this contract. But if the moment you give in, you are in trouble. That's a mistake which I find most people make. That when they go for a negotiation, the mindset should be that I need to sign the contract. The mindset should be I need to make sure that I get this. And if I'm not getting this, I don't want it. I'll have maybe I lose out this time, but it doesn't work most of the time because it's not one person who's going in. There are probably 2-3 people, and each one says a different thing, and So coming back to so I think advantages of written contract, apart from what I said, it brings in that much clarity. If there is a situation where things are going wrong, you're better off if you have a good written document. There's one more advantage which of late which I'm seeing is typically for startups. When there is an investor who's looking at a startup, they typically do a due diligence, and they ask you invariably that what is the contract that you have, and if you say that no, I don't have a contract, I've been working on trust, they're puzzled. They're like, how are you doing business? So therefore that shows as a business you are mature, you're more compliant. So that's an added advantage. So it doesn't matter that whether it's a 1-page contract or a 10-page contract, but having a contract will also help you get investments. An indirect form of telling the investor that look, you are investing at the right place. Yeah.
Typically for product, you said it's based. The contract will be based on the material supply, give and take. But for services, we do associate partnership agreements. So it's based on the services. What is the typical or standard maximum timeline we could give for the contract? Because they say we could keep it for 10 years or 15 years. So what is your suggestion on
You're
it?
saying the service provider wants the contract to continue for 10 years, is it?
No, we are signing a contract with the associate partners, whereas they provide services. So what would be the timeline? What should be the timeline, best timeline we could keep it in the contract?
There is no rule which is the best timeline. That again depends on comfort of both parties.
Okay.
So ideally, if it's a service contract, you would keep it short term. You would not keep it long term. But if you are keeping it long term, have a clause in the contract that you can terminate by giving them, say, 6 months notice or something like that. Because there is no rule that for a product you're right, because you're saying product contract, once the supply is over, it's all over. In a service, it can continue. But there is no such thing at what is the right period. It depends, again, who the service provider is. If it's a reputed service provider who's been in the market for a good number of years, you are happy with what you may do a long term, but make sure that you have an exit route.
For me, it's better to have a short-term contract because it's always to revise the performance and then to change the contract accordingly. So shall I say like 10 years would be ideal?
So what you could do is you could have two understandings, two contracts. One saying that we will have a firm contract for a period of 3 years or 5 years or whatever. If at the end of 5 years I am satisfied with it, I will definitely extend it by another 5 years. So there are ways and means of, making both parties happy and accept things.
So as per my knowledge, if it is written in a document, the validity will be 11 months. Right? So if we are doing services also, we have to, year by year, we have to modify as per the scope and all, we have to modify the thing and then we have to add something or reduce something. So the document will be valid for 10 to 11 months, means we have to year by year we have to modify.
Yes. So if your contract says that this contract will be valid for a period of 11 months.
If it is a written document, means it will be valid for 11 months.
No, that is, okay, I think, so what happens is if it is a lease, if you're taking lease of a property, if the period of lease is more than a year, then it is necessary, it is mandatory in law for you to register that document, which means you have to pay the stamp duty and registration charges to the government. So to avoid that, what people do is don't have 12 months, keep it at 11 months. So every 11 month you renew it. So that's only applicable for lease. It is not for your regular service contracts and all.